Good afternoon. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what the IET is, as Ian says, it's a professional body. It's a professional engineering body. We have about 150,000 members. Those are spread around the globe. About somewhere between 60 and 70% of them are UK based. Ian was talking about professionalisation. I'm a chartered engineer. I'm a fellow of the Institute. I'm also a CISP. I do slightly disagree with Ian's point about the CISP certification. It's a very tough exam, 5 hours of multiple choice in one go, no books in sight. My brain felt fried when I came out from that. The CV I had to then write to prove that I had sufficient experience to actually be given the certification runs to nearly 15 pages and took 3 attempts to get right. So I think there's a slight misconception about some of the hurdles we jumped through to get there. I'd like to talk a bit about, first, what do we mean by cybersecurity? I think there's a misconception at times that cybersecurity is just digital stuff. It's networks, it's the internet. I'd like to disabuse you of that. Cybersecurity is actually much wider. It includes analog things, wireless, analog measurements. It includes a lot of electronic devices. It includes some passive devices like RFID tags. You forge one of those, you spoof one of those, you could have all sorts of consequences. So when we talk about cyber as an engineering community, I look at the whole of that. The consequences of getting it wrong can be quite severe. This is Buncefield. It was a major explosion just outside Hemel Hempstead. It did quite a lot of damage. Fortunately, there were no deaths. But by the size of the fines, you can see that the company's actually suffered major financial loss in terms of fines. They were out of business for a long time. There was huge disruption locally. A number of office buildings were destroyed. The M1 was shut for a period. Flights into Heathrow were diverted. Why is it cyber? It's cyber because the underlying cause of this was that an IT-based system failed. It failed to stop a tank of petrol filling. Why did it fail? Partly through a lack of testing. They didn't know that certain features weren't working. The overflow valve that should have stopped that overfilling of a tank actually was a fault in its design. And it was in a mode where it couldn't actually record the fact that they were overfilling the tank. When you look at some of the real IT parts of the problem, the operator couldn't even see a display to tell him that the tank was overfilling. And if he had seen it and pressed the emergency stop button on the screen, it wouldn't work. It hadn't been tested. To me, those are all cybersecurity issues because they go to the heart of the integrity of a system and its availability. We often think about hackers as being attacking companies just for sort of financial data, for intellectual property rights. There have been some quite serious hacks. This is an oil rig in the Pacific. The attack here was an insider attack. What he'd done was effectively disable their ability to monitor discharges. Fortunately, no discharges were occurring at the time. Had they been occurring, and had the company not realised that oil and gas was spilling out of that rig, the environmental damage in quite a sensitive part of the Pacific would have been huge. Lawsuits, given it was close on the sort of San Francisco, Los Angeles area, would have been enormous. Another cyber issue based on a truly engineered system. Cyber's not always about being hacked or being attacked. It can be about the way systems work. So for example, the failure of a system through false alarms could cause immense brand damage. This is the Shard in London. They had a false alarm on their fire alarm systems. The consequence of that was that the lift stopped working. And there were a large number of people stranded up at the observation level. Within a very short time, minutes, tweets were going out with pictures like that. In terms of your brand damage, that is quite serious. It's also quite hard to recover from if it occurs often. So that gives you a picture of why are engineers interested in cyber, and why is it more than just information assurance or information security. If we look at where the world is going, we're talking about much more complex built environment, much more complex environments. So the diagram here is of a stadium, a large sports stadium. When that's full, there are some 90,000 people in it. It is an incredibly sophisticated piece of engineering. In terms of the IT in it, you've got building systems. Those are the key things that just make it a safe and habitable environment. You've got some building services that are about protecting that environment. So they're things like control rooms, links to the police. And then you've got the sort of accommodation services that actually allow the operator to make a profit and run it, as it were, on a smooth daily basis. They're all IT based. They're all sitting on TCP/IP networks. Allegedly, in some of the new ones, they're all on a single TCP/IP network. They're a fantastic target if the cybersecurity of that construction isn't properly engineered. Down here, we have the way that things are starting to go. So we're talking about smart cities, smart grid, intelligent buildings. All of these are going to be IT based. They're going to involve huge amounts of data being exchanged. They are a challenge, because the way we currently engineer systems, they wouldn't be cyber secure. Sorry, we've got a distortion. The IT did a skills survey earlier this year, and we looked at the needs of industry. So we looked at 250 SMEs spread across 5 industry sectors. If the blurring hadn't worked, the key to this is that the green, IT forensics, was the only skill that industry said it could actually find sufficient of. The ones in red are areas where they were saying there are particular shortages. And the larger the red text, the more the shortage was supposed to be, or the demand was. What I find interesting is that many of the shortage areas are actually in standard IT and technology areas. It's often not the security bit that's the problem. The question we were asking in terms of getting this information was, in order to protect your systems, what skill set do you need? So we weren't asking them what security skills do you need as such, but asking them about their general skills base. The IT's been undertaking a number of initiatives over the last year or so to try and help with the cybersecurity problem. One initiative we're associated with is the Trustworthy Software Initiative. Personally, I see that as a key part of cybersecurity, because if the software we write is not trustworthy, there is no way it can be secure. So what do we mean by trustworthiness? It's got to be safe. Safe means that when we're operating it, it shouldn't do things that are unpredictable and unreliable, or cause it to fail. There's a reliability issue. We expect software to do the same thing each time it's asked. We don't expect it to do random things. Availability. Often not high on the sort of general IT agenda, but in the engineering sort of systems that we're interested in, it's always high. As Kevin said this morning, that's often the highest priority for critical systems, for SCADA systems. There's the security, the ability for systems to be designed to protect themselves against attacks. Some of that just comes down to thinking about how you've engineered a system. And finally, the topic of resilience. How often do we build systems today where there are single points of failure? Unfortunately, it's far too often outside of the process control industries. So we allow single boxes to fail and a whole network to go down. When we're looking ahead to the sort of smart environments, if we don't get that right, life could rapidly regress to sort of 18th century as we suddenly find all the smart features in our buildings go down. The Trustworthy Software Initiative isn't generating very much new material, but what it's trying to do at present is collate all the good practice and knowledge that's there. And then we're going to be starting to provide case studies for universities to use as part of their teaching, both for undergraduates and postgraduates, to help them understand why good system and good software engineering is so important. The next initiative I'd like to talk about is the Cyber Security Skills Alliance. So this is a group of organisations that has agreed that they're prepared to come together, work together to improve cybersecurity. So we have three professional bodies, the IET, the BCS and IISP, all agreeing to work together. We have IAC, which is the Information Assurance Advisory Council. Effectively, it's a group of corporate organisations, both government and private, that are interested in information assurance. And we have eSkills. The idea of us all trying to get together is, rather than have disparate activities going on, some of which may conflict or overlap, we want to work together to try and drive the skills agenda. One of our first initiatives is actually to try and put in place a sponsorship scheme for MSc students. So this year we're piloting it with 4 institutions: De Montfort, Lancaster, Plymouth and Warwick. And the idea there is to provide students who can work in the UK with a very generous bursary to offset the cost of their fees. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to encourage industry to actually provide the bursaries, but also to get UK students to want to come and do MScs. When I look at those courses, the stats we've been provided from, the bulk of the students on them at present are overseas students. What the Alliance would like to achieve is many more of those being home-based students. Other initiatives we're looking at is that IAC are piloting a interns program this year. That's supposed to complement work that CREST are doing with their penetration testing interns, but looking at a wider set of security professional roles. eSkills are developing apprenticeships for cybersecurity at level 3 and level 4. So that's 16 to 18-year-olds and 18-year-olds plus. I think that's a very exciting development, because it's often those sort of technician, hands-on type people that we need to support us. eSkills are also working on training and development frameworks, as Ian mentioned. So taking this forward, how do we make this successful? What we need to do is all work together. At present, the IET are coordinating much of the work of the Alliance. If you're interested in helping us with it, getting involved in the sort of work we're doing, there's an email address and we'll be delighted to hear from you. Thank you.